All right, students, so the next lesson we're going to talk about is lesson 103, and that's discussing the distributive property. Now, we've talked a lot over the years through your math instruction, I'm sure, about the distributive property. And what that pretty much means is when you have parentheses and something's sitting up next to the parentheses, it distributes to every term inside the parentheses. So what I was trained to do as a young student is this. Okay, I had to draw little like arches to remind myself that I had to do 4 times 2 and 4 times 3 and then add those together. The sign for the term doesn't change, but what this essentially means is we're going to do 4 times 2 plus 4 times 3. Okay, and now because of PEMDAS, we know that we have to do multiplication and division before we do addition and subtraction. So we're going to do 4 times 2 is 8, plus 4 times 3 is 12, and we get 20. Now, some of you may be saying, well, can't you just add the 2 and the 3 together and multiply it by 4? Well, yeah, because then that would give us 4 times 5, which would still be 20. And these things match, don't they? Okay. Now, the reason that they want you to understand that we distribute that 4 to the 2 and the 3 is because we're going to start working with variables and distribution. And so you have to make sure that you understand that you get the same answer either way, but if we don't have a value for the items inside the parentheses, we can't really solve for just one number. And so it gets a little more complicated as you work with variables, which we're going to look at today. So in the little box on page 320 is one of those really confusing letter messes that they try to teach us concepts with, but I just thought I'd go over it really quick, okay? So if we have A parentheses B plus C, it means the same thing as A times B plus A times C. And likewise, if you have B plus C in parentheses with A being multiplied, it means we have BA, meaning B times A plus C times A. Okay, so let's look at how this is going to affect us moving forward and the new concept that is being introduced to you today. Now, it says 103.1 says use the distributive property to multiply. And we have a 4 parentheses and then x plus 2y minus 8. So remember those little arches, okay? When we distribute, the 4, because it's being multiplied, has to multiply by each term inside the parentheses, okay? Now, we do this because, can we simplify anything inside here? Remember with PEMDAS, we say we simplify inside the parentheses, but we can't simplify anything in here. These terms are not like terms. There's nothing else with an x, there's nothing else with a y, and there's no other whole numbers, okay? So the only thing that we can do with this is distribute that 4. And so the first term is an x, and so 4 times x means we have 4x, okay? And then our sign that separates the terms comes down. And then we have 4 times 2y. Now, if we have 2 y's and we multiply 2 y's times 4, we get 8 y's. So we just do the coefficients. We do 4 times 2, which is 8, and add the y. And now we have a 4, positive 4, times a negative 8. Our negative is going to come down because we have a positive times a negative. And 4 times 8 is 32. Now, can we combine any of these terms? No, we can't. So this is the answer. Now, I know this is confusing. This is what I was going to say in the last video. I know this is confusing because for your whole life in math, there's one answer, right? Well, now this is what your answers look like, okay? So just make sure when you get to something you think is your final answer that you just look at it critically and say, okay, is there any other simplifying I can do here? Are there any terms that I can combine? And in this case, there is not, okay? And they only give you one more example on this. And so because of that, one of the things that I've done is I went and made an extra practice worksheet. Okay, so this is on Edmodo for you as well. Please print it out or copy down the problems and do it because this is something that you're going to want a lot of practice with, and they really don't provide that in the text. So our next distributive property of multiplication problem is we have 3x, parentheses, and then y minus 2 plus 2x. Now, the concept doesn't change. We take the 3x and we multiply it by our first term, our second term, and our third term. 3x times y. Now, do we know what x or y are? We don't. So all we know is that they're being multiplied by each other. So the only thing we can do is say 3xy. Okay? Is it true that now x and y are still being multiplied by each other? And that 3 is being multiplied by all of them? Yeah. So if we ever find out the value for x and y, then we can solve this. But until then, all we can say is that we know that 3x and y are being multiplied by each other. Very confusing, I know. Now we're going to bring down our symbol, and then we have a 3x times a negative 2, right? So 3 times 2 is 6, and there's an x still being multiplied there that we don't yet know the value of. All right, now here's where this one's going to get a little confusing. Are you ready for this? We have a 3 times a 2. We know we can find a value for that, right? A 3 times a 2 is a 6. And then we have an x times an x. Now, again, what happens when we do x times x? Now, remember, anytime we multiply a variable that has a exponent, we add the exponents, right? So this is x to the first power times x to the first power, which gives us x to the 1 plus 1, which gives us x squared. X times x is not 2x, it's x squared, okay? So this term becomes 6x squared. And that's your final answer. Now again, if you want to write it in descending order, the way that we would write this one is 6x squared minus 6x plus 3xy. You are not responsible for that yet, okay? But that's how we would write it. All right, again, remember, whenever sitting outside of the parentheses, first we ask ourselves, is there anything that we can simplify inside the parentheses to follow PEMDAS? And if there's not, then we have to move on to, there's no exponents, multiplication, division. We multiply the term on the outside of the parentheses by each one of the terms inside the parentheses, and then we have our answer, okay? Remember, the plus and minus signs don't change. And remember, a variable times a variable, if it's the same as variable squared. And if it's not, like we have x and y here, all we can do is know that x and y are still being multiplied by each other because we don't yet know the value. If you need help, please reach out.